Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today's video is much earlier than it normally is, and that's because Riot have just announced Ornn. They finally revealed his kit, his abilities, everything about him. I could not be more excited, so I figure, hey, we're going to hop on this and we're going to go ahead and take a look at our newest champion and kind of give my first few thoughts on his kit, at least on paper. Now, again, all this is pretty much speculation. There's some things that haven't been clarified yet, so I will be telling you about these. First up, let's talk about Ornn's passive. So he is intended to be a Vanguard, I should say. He should be a frontline fighter, so his abilities are generally going to be going at the enemy team and doing lots of damage. His passive is called Living Forge, but he also has two passives. So it's Living Forge and Master Craftsman. Living Forge means he can spend gold to forge items for himself anytime he's out of combat, which means that Ornn, if he's in lane, he can go under tower and just buy items. That's huge. I cannot emphasize this enough. Even though it costs him a little bit of time, and I'm assuming time spent scales with the quality of the item he's building, that's a huge deal because what it means is that Ornn never has to leave lane. If he's got enough sustain, it doesn't matter. In fact, he can buy sustain for himself in lane. If he's still like reasonably on health, he can just buy health potions. That's a big deal. Now, Riot may have limited it so you can't actually buy consumables. I think that would be a relatively easy way to balance it out somewhat. But the fact that Ornn doesn't ever have to base is a big deal. That's going to be possibly one of the best parts of Ornn's kit. The other part of his passive, Master Craftsman, is possibly even better. Ornn and his teammates can buy special upgrades for select items in the shop. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. This is huge. This means that by picking Ornn, your team just has more options than the other team. You straight up get better items than the other team just by picking Ornn. Already, now we don't know any of the special upgrades, but already I'm thinking Ornn is going to be valued in professional play just for that. You pick Ornn, it doesn't matter if he's a good champion or not. You just play him because your AD carry just gets stronger than their AD carry. Now, everyone can only buy one upgrade, and it's only for certain items, so I can understand it to a certain extent. At the end of the day, though, I think that's going to be really, really significantly strong, especially in late game scenarios where your team just gets more items than their team now. So that's really, really good. Moving on to the rest of Ornn's kit, his Q is called a Volcanic Rupture. He basically hits the ground, he sends out a skill shot that deals physical damage and slows enemies, and then at the end of the ability, it creates a magma pillar at the location, which functions like a tiny little wall. So this is an interesting ability. It gives Ornn a bit of stickiness in a fight, especially given that it creates a wall at the end. The little tiny wall doesn't seem like it'll be that much value unless you can position it perfectly, but it does also mean that abilities that rely on terrain, like Ornn's W or something like Vayne E, can also play into it. So I think that could be an interesting use of the ability. It feels pretty standard besides that, so we're not going to spend too much time there. We're going to move on. Ornn's W is called Bellows Breath. He becomes unstoppable, meaning that CC can't stop him, he will keep moving, shields himself, and belches out flames. The flames deal a portion of the enemy's current health as magic damage. An enemy struck by the last gout of flame become brittle. Now, Brittle is a new status effect that causes enemies to take a portion of their max health as bonus damage when struck by an immobilizing effect, and immobilizing effects last longer when used on brittle enemies. So, Leona Solar Flare, as you see in the video, stuns Lissandra for longer than it should because she's currently brittle. That is pretty big. I kind of like it on a Vanguard. It gives Ornn interesting play with either following up an initiation or having someone follow up the initiation himself. If Ornn goes in and starts a fight, then somebody like the Jarvan IV can follow in afterwards and basically be better for it. So I do actually really like this ability. The unstoppable portion is pretty strong, but it looks like Ornn is slowed significantly while he's using it, so that shouldn't be too big of a deal. And I should mention as well, Ornn's basic attacks against brittle targets knock them back, meaning that he does get the bonus max HP damage. So that should be a reasonably effective way for Ornn to trade in lane. If he can time the ability well as well, it also lets him ignore enemy crowd control effects to keep fighting. So that's actually really cool. I think that's an interesting ability. The whole concept of brittle is unique as well. I like how it plays on Ornn, at least on paper. Ornn's E is Searing Charge. He charges to deal damage to enemies he passes through. If he hits terrain, he creates a shockwave that damages and knocks up enemies. And that's a pretty large radius too from the look of it. So, like, larger than a Malphite ult, I think. So Ornn really wants to be playing with terrain. And again, this factors in with his Q. If he's able to hit that little tiny wall, he gets this big AoE knockup. However, it works on any terrain, meaning that if you have an Anivia or a Jarvan or anyone else who makes terrain and Ornn charges into it, he gets the big AoE knockup. That's going to be the biggest thing for me, is making sure Ornn gets that knockup, because otherwise it's a bit of a lackluster ability. He just damages people he goes through. That's not that big of a deal. The other thing I should mention as well is that Ornn's E here will break player-created terrain, meaning that if your allies are trapped in a Jarvan the 4th ultimate or locked in through an Anivia wall, Ornn can literally blast away to freedom. That's pretty cool. I'm excited to see how that works. And this is sort of the generic Vanguard AoE, though it does have ways to optimize around it. It's not just press R and win like a Malphite ultimate, and I do really like that. Finally, Ornn's R is Call of the Forge God. He summons a giant elemental at a location that travels towards him. If enemies get run over, they take magic damage and become brittle. And then if he recasts the ability, he'll charge forward. If he hits the elemental, he'll redirect it, which will then knock up, deal damage, and apply the brittle effect to every enemy it passes through. And this is really, really interesting, given that it charges towards Ornn. So he positions the elemental behind the enemy team and then redirects it at them. Or alternatively, he can position it behind him. The enemy team may not have a chance to see it coming. Then he can charge into it and redirect it towards the enemy team. It seems like an ability with a lot of interesting plays around it. It also seems like a lot of new Ornns are going to wildly whiff their ultimate, but if you can land it, it feels like it could be really, really strong as well. So I actually really like that ability. I think it's going to be very unique. And it does help out Ornn with his whole initiation prospect. That's how he starts a fight. And then he follows up with ideally the E knockup on that ability. So I think that's going to be really, really cool. Overall, I think Ornn is an interesting Vanguard. He has ways of starting fights very clearly, but I think the biggest problem for me is he doesn't feel like a lot of his strength is in his Vanguard-ness, as it were. Like, Malphite is strong because he has a very strong initiation. He has good follow-up by reducing attack speed. He has a reason to exist once he's gone in. Ornn feels interesting in that he doesn't do much besides apply Brittle. That's the biggest part of his kit, is he wants to make sure he's applying Brittle to as many people as possible to make the follow-up stronger. But at the same time, the biggest portion of his strength is the fact that he has all the stuff that he does with items, being able to purchase from anywhere and literally just granting his teammates better items. That's my biggest thing about Ornn, and it's going to be really interesting to me to see how he gets played and if people value him for more than just his passive. Lore-wise, we have no information on Ornn yet. However, he was battling with Lysandra in his teaser trail and his ability previews, and that to me almost always says when the champion is beating up on a specific champion in their teasers, that tells me that they have a relationship with that champion. There were a couple of other posts on the boards. Sharjo, I know in particular, who's a lore master for Riot, mentioned that Ornn is basically a god. He's tangoed with a specific champion in the past. He's not quite as strong as Aurelion Sol, but he is one of the strongest beings in League of Legends, which tells me that I think that Lysandra is the one he was fighting with. Like Sharjo mentioned, Lysandra probably knows he exists. There's also a lot of details hidden in the background of Ornn's first teaser video, all the letters behind the one we're supposed to be reading, mentioning something like 3 sisters and an abyssal trench in the ocean and a trident, something along those lines, because every region had a different one. I'll do a post about that on the blog later, but it's very interesting to see how Ornn is going to play into the League of Legends as a whole, and I'm happy to see we got a fire champion out of the Freljord. Everyone was ice in the Freljord. Literally everyone. So it's nice to see somebody is doing something different. Anyways, that's going to be it for me today, guys. Go ahead and let me know what you are thinking of Ornn down in the comment section below. I would love to hear your thoughts on this guy. I think he's going to be very strong. I don't know necessarily if he's going to have professional aspirations or if I'm going to enjoy playing him, but I think he looks like he's going to be quite strong indeed. Go ahead and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. If you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I will talk to you all later.